Greece in the previous century went through many conflicts. 2 world wars, Balkan wars, a civil war, the dictatorship, and then of course when the dictatorship in Greece tried to overthrow the legal government of the Republic of Cyprus, it was an aborted coup. Then we had the invasion and the war from the Turkish side of the Republic of Cyprus, which now remains, luckily, a divided and occupied country. This had created great dependencies, deeply divided country. Yet during the dictatorship in the 60s and 70s, there were great solidarity from the progressive movements around the world, certainly in Europe. We had many exiled refugees in Germany, in Scandinavia, the UK, Holland, Italy, who fought with progressive forces and the progressive parties, social democratic parties, for the liberation of Greece, so that Greece could be free and democratic again. And we all are very grateful to this solidarity, particularly the fight to kick out Greece from the Council of Europe, which was successful, but which gave a very strong message that Europe was behind democracy in Greece. The transition from a dictatorship, an authoritarian regime, to a democracy, of course, was not an easy process, but it was based on some very important principles which we progressives fought for. First of all, very obvious, to make sure that the army remains in the barracks. It serves the country, it does not control the country. It serves politics, and politics itself, democratic politics, would rule. So that was one of our first major goals of our movements, of our progressive movements. A second was to strengthen institutions, democratic institutions, such as building robust local government, decentralizing, bringing up the trade unions to be able to have a voice and be participating in social policy and in politics, building cooperatives, but also the youth movement, which was so instrumental in bringing down the dictatorship, but also in fighting for democracy and freedom. And of course, women's movements also bringing women's rights to the fore. A third was to build a robust and progressive socialist and democratic party. And that was PASOK in Greece, which really brought in citizens to participate in politics and opened up a major dialogue around Greece, again, with great enthusiasm and participation of the younger generation. In government, as social democrats, we fought for reconciliation because there were still deep divides after the Civil War, many exiled in the countries of the East, and the former Soviet Union also. So we allowed them to return. We also respected their fight that they had against the Nazis. And this was a very important moment of reconciliation. But we further helped this reconciliation by building a community and society of social rights, whether it's in health or in education, but also in democratic rights and women's rights, where we had one of the most progressive changes in Europe at the time. Finally, in this transition to democracy, there was a cultural shift, building a understanding and knowledge about how we use democracy, how we build up the culture of democracy, dialogue, debate, the acceptance of different views. And in this, I think refugees, Greek refugees and migrants who had lived outside Greece for many years in democratic countries, many of them returned after the dictatorship, and they got very involved from their villages all the way to government positions in bringing both hope, but also their expertise, their knowledge of how democracies work, and truly as a diaspora, playing a very important role in building this culture of democracy, I think that's a lesson not only for Greece, but for what we're seeing around the world, is how refugees could play a future role if they have the chance to go back and build up their country in a democratic way. In more recent years, Greece has gone through crises. For example, the major crisis which I had to face, the financial crisis, with great pain and sacrifices by the Greek people. But this was not a crisis which came upon us simply because we had overspent. And certainly it was part of a wider crisis, both of the euro and, of course, of Wall Street, where the whole crisis began, and with Lehman Brothers. However, we had our specificities. The Greek crisis, I believe, was because of a type of economy, I call it a clientelistic capitalist model, where our institutions, still weak, still not as robust as we wanted, could be very well influenced or even captive of oligarchs, strongmen, other types of interests, which did not reflect the will of the people, but also did not promote meritocracy and transparency and accountability. And therefore, the economy and the budget was derailed because of this. That's why when we took over during the crisis, we, as Social Democrats, fought for institutional changes to really strengthen transparency, institutions which would be accountable, simple, such as the Statistical Bureau, to have clear and honest statistics, and make sure that Greece was on a path of much more robust and accountable governance systems. We still have a lot to do, of course, but now we are facing a wider issue in a globalized society, not only Greece, but Europe, the world. And that is, I would say, that globalization has undermined the social contract, as capital can move around freely and avoid its obligations in the social contract. It can move to tax havens, it can move to countries which have less workers' rights or environmental protection, and therefore lower costs also, and greater profits. This has undermined the social contract, but it has also created huge inequalities at the global level. We see it, and this is an issue which affects our democracies. It is an issue which goes back even to Aristotle and Plato, when they looked at civil strife in ancient Athenian and other democracies of the time, the city democracies, city-state democracies, where they felt that inequality was corrosive of democratic institutions and was ripe for authoritarian and demagogic figures. What we're seeing even today, the rise, because of this inequality, of those who like to cultivate fear, who look for scapegoating, who build on racism and ultranationalism, demagogic figures which promise to bring a paradise by saying, they are the saviors, but in the end they divide and polarize societies. And I think this is the major threat we are facing today. As we move into a major transition, which is a climate transition to sustainable developments, societies, and economies. And that's why the challenge we have as socialists, as Democrats, as Greens, if you like, as progressives, is to see a transition with three, I would say, basic principles. Otherwise, we will be moving into demagogy and authoritarianism. And these are, first of all, a just transition. We need to fight inequality in this as we move into a Green New Deal. The weight of the transition cannot fall on the less advantaged, the middle class, and it is necessary for those who have amazing amounts of wealth to pay and support this transition in a just way. The second issue is this has to be a democratic transition. It has to be owned by our citizens. They have to be part, not only in consensus building, but also in developing the ideas, informing where we want to go. We are going to be changing our habits from how we eat, how we consume, how we build, how we travel, how we create our cities, our whole energy, our health and public education systems. This is a massive transition, and if it's not owned by our citizens, it will be rejected. It will not be able to be effective. And thirdly, a participatory democracy means an educated public, a public with where we have invested in culture and education, and our schools, which are not there only to give us skills, which have to change for a green economy, of course. But other than the technical skills, we have to build the idea of citizenship, that our schools create democratic citizens, build up democratic citizens that can work together in teams, cooperate in a diverse society, whether it's in a nation or between nations and different peoples. These, I believe, are the challenges we have as progressives,